My name is David Parkinson. I'm from Royal Haskellane DHV, and I want to talk to you about this thing called supply chain in a VUCA world and how to really position yourselves for success. I've got a particular reason for talking about VUCA, which I'll come to now, in fact. So VUCA came from the American military, actually. They started talking about it, I think, during the first Iraq War. And it really characterizes, the kind of world that actually we live in today. So it's volatile. When things happen, they happen quickly. It's uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen next, right? Very often. Complex. There's lots of interdependencies out there. If you change one thing, it's going to change something else. And ambiguous. Well, what does the change mean? One person will take one meaning and another. And it's the absolutes that we all used to rely on are just not there to the same extent that they were. And I think if you look at some examples, and just I picked a few from the last 15 years or so, I mean, one of the first ones I remember was the 97 Asian currency crash. I was living in Thailand at the time, and the currency halved in value over the course of a week. So, but then, of course, more recently, the financial crisis. I think China is an example where suddenly China is a massive force on the world stage and really flexing the muscles. And the size of the economy has grown. I remember going to a conference 10 years ago, and the professor was telling us that no, China would be an economy that would supply the rest of the world for the foreseeable future. China is now the second largest or third largest economy in the world, and is a massive consumer, and we're seeing the impacts of that today. Climate change, we keep hearing about e-commerce, the rise of e-commerce, and so on. So you can go on, Middle East instability, even Eastern European instability with Turkey and Hungary. There's much going on. Social media is changing the way that we interact with one another. So there's a lot going on. And I think Brexit is just another example of this. Okay, Brexit is just another VUCA event which is happening to us in the UK. And I think, a lot of people think, well, Brexit is coming. Should I do something? Shouldn't I do something? How do I prepare myself? How do I prepare for the unknown? Actually, whether Brexit was here or not is a slightly academic question. The question is, how are you building your supply chain and building your business to really succeed in a world like this? And so when I talk about the Brexit challenges in the next few slides, I'm talking about, these are the challenges that face us an industry anyway. So why wait to see whether Brexit happens or not happen? Let's start thinking about how we can work with these things. So, but using Brexit as the example, I think we can see three big risks or constraints or challenges to the food and beverage industry in the UK. First one, which is fairly obvious, is supply chain tightening. So we've heard a lot about migrant workers not being available to come into the country to do the work in the fields and to man the factories. And we still have an awful lot of manual labor in our factories in the UK. Equally, we can see there is a tightening in skilled labor as well. And how do we cope with that? Logistics and planning likely to become more complex. We hear horror stories of 40-mile tailbacks on motorways and so on. How are we going to manage that? More delays, more disruption. And finally, increasing costs. We all, I believe, seen that devaluing your currency by 20% has an impact on prices in the market. And it certainly has an impact on imported goods and the cost of them. So let's think about what can we do to address these three things. Because actually, if we start to address these in our businesses, then not only will we position ourselves well to succeed in a post-Brexit world, but also we'll be thriving in the VUCA world that we live in today. So let me take these one at a time, okay? So labor supply is tightening. And I think, if you read the IMF report, one of the things that is often they worry about is the productivity of labor in the UK. And actually, it's difficult to see on this chart, but this is the UK, and this is Germany. So you can see that in the last 10 years, productivity has been lagging by around 1% per year, just a bit less than 1% per year in the UK compared to our major competitors in Germany. And we're behind France and Italy as well. So that is a problem for us, because it means that we are not producing, we're not continuing to increase the amount of goods per head of population that our competitors are doing, which means that our labor in terms of man hours of product per ton of product or per item is not changing very dramatically, whereas it is with our competitors. Equally, unemployment here is at a historic low. It's down to 4% now, right? So what that means, and it's amazing that it's got that low. I remember back in the 80s we talked about 1 million unemployed for the first time, and we've been up to, I think, 3 million, more than 3 million employed and unemployed in the last 15 years, and now it's come all the way back down to something in low single figures, which is amazing, and it's great at one level, but it's going to constrain our ability to grow our economy. If we can't get labor, we aren't improving our productivity, then we are going to struggle to grow. And what happens then? Then we get into an inflationary cycle, and it's going to be a problem for us. So what are the things that we could do? So just a couple of ideas. Okay, so the first one is, well, let's think about the low-skilled worker and the fact that there aren't unemployment's low, so getting people at the low end of the spectrum in terms of skills isn't very easy anymore, and likely to cost us more in the future. So an obvious thing is to go for automation in our factories. And these are just like 3 examples of automation. So whether it's packing products into cases, very often still done manually. You can buy something called a Delta robot, that's that thing on the left-hand side, which will pick each and every single one of those and put them in a box for you in the right number, in the right orientation. Cobots. Who's heard of cobots before today? No? Okay, so these are that's these things here. Those are their eyes, right? They are very simple robots, and they basically have an arm and a stand, right? And they are very easy to program. They cost in the range of, say, $2,000 to $5,000, and you can put them to do simple tasks on your production lines. So if you think, well, actually, one of these can do the work of a person at that station, then it's a very good economic payback. And I was working in Asia up until the beginning of last year, and I can tell you we were experimenting with these in places like Indonesia and Thailand, where you don't think that labor is expensive. And we were finding that we could make business cases with them. So recommend those. And you don't need to guard them in the same way that you need to guard traditional robots. They can stand and work alongside an operator. And finally, this idea here of a laser-guided vehicle. So this is a forklift truck which does not have a driver. And again, you don't need to put these behind fences. They will work alongside a traditional fork truck driver in an open warehouse. You don't have to redesign your factory. They are a bit more expensive than cobots, quite a lot more expensive. But nevertheless, you think you're taking another person out of your system, which means your need for low-cost labor is going down. And these machines don't take holidays. They're not sick, right? and they don't take meal breaks and things. So actually, they are very productive and becoming more and more viable alternatives to low-cost labor. The second thing you can do for the skilled labor part of your equation is to look at how can you upskill your best engineers even more in your factories. And of course, we always used to have this problem that, we used to have one engineer almost per machine. We don't do that anymore. We have one engineer per area in the factory quite often, trying to look after. And of course, you have variably good engineers, but they're still limited by the physical space with which they can cover and what they see when they get there. So it's very often the case that something's breaking down or not working, and so somebody calls an engineer over to have a look and help them solve the problem, and the problem goes away, or it doesn't manifest itself in that moment, so the guy walks away and then it happens again, right? So when you take your car to the garage, the same thing happens sometimes. So how can you overcome that problem and make the very precious engineering resource go further? And using these predictive maintenance systems, where they basically put more and more sensors onto the machines and use the cloud to collect all the data and then bring it down to an analytical tool. This is being used more and more in the injection molding industry, for example, where the problems are when you do have technical problems, they're quite difficult to solve. So you can imagine that through this system, your very best engineer can be observing and diagnosing every machine in your factory from a central point. And then when he understands what's happening, he can go and help solve the problem or direct the intervention of the team that are operating it. So it's a very powerful way of leveraging the skills that you've got and enhancing the skills even further. So that's it for labor. Let's talk briefly about planning and logistics. Again, this has been in the news a lot about clogged up motorways, delays at ports. We heard about that this morning. Are we going to have 30-minute waits at customs, or is it going to be 2 hours? What does that mean for you if you are running a supply chain? Well, I think fundamentally it means uncertainty at the beginning. And the question is, how can you take some of that uncertainty out of the equation and use some technologies to help you? And the obvious example of this is real-time tracking and using artificial intelligence to automate, to optimize the route planning for your inbound logistics. You can use it for outbound logistics as well. And simply put, that means that when your planner tells you, oh, the material you're waiting for has left the supplier, we think it should take about an hour, but we're not sure. Actually, you will have in your hand the data that says, well, actually, it's going to take 45 minutes. And you won't have to keep calling the guy back saying, where are you? When will you arrive? Because I have this line waiting to start, or I'm deciding when to change this line over, and I don't want to do it until this material arrives. So this very real problem of running a supply chain, you can take some of the uncertainty out by using this type of system. The other thing that you can do, which is more around how you design your supply chain, is look at how can you increase the tolerance of your supply chain to uncertainty. So that's looking at the opposite side of the coin. And there's just 3 examples here. So I worked for Unilever for many, many years, and even 15 years, 20 years ago, we were talking about late variant addition. Does anybody know what I mean by late variant addition? Well, it means let's say you've got a pink flavored liquid, like strawberry liquid. Where do you put the color in? If you put the color in at the beginning when you mix it, it means that all of your system is full of pink liquid, right, to the filler. So if you want to change to orange liquid, you have to wash the whole thing out, right? If you put the color in at the filler itself, right at the last minute, the late variant edition, then you don't have to wash out in the same way. And you can apply that to flavors, you can apply that to perfumes. Thank you. So there are many. So sometimes it's difficult. It's not always very easy to do this, but as a philosophy, if you can delay customization to the last possible moment in your process, you're making yourself much more robust to uncertainty. So if the orange the orange flavoring doesn't arrive and you want to change to green flavoring instead, then or mint flavored, let's say, then you can do that much more easily. Equally, printing has always been a constraint in the supply chain, and now more and more online printing solutions are available, which means that this tube is basically 2/3 of that print is done on the line by a digital printer. So the obstacles of digital printing are becoming less and less as the technology increases. And lastly, but not least, simple, quick changeover, the installation of CIP systems which clean in place. That's what that means, CIP, clean in place, which means that you don't have to disassemble something in order to clean it before you put it back again and start with a new product. That means that can save you anything from 4 hours to a shift, just by having something as simple as a CIP system. And they might cost you 50,000 euros or pounds, but that's a real solution. So then moving on quickly onto the third area, which is cost. And we looked at all the 1,000 reasons why costs are going to be a problem in the future here, whether it's about upskilling, labor shortages, devalued currency. I think the thing to remember is that everyone, I said this earlier, in the UK is going to experience the same kind of things. So the question is, can you be better than your competitor? And I think the other thing when you're faced with a crisis, which you could argue Brexit is, actually one of the best approaches to deal with a crisis is to actually hit it head on, to face up to it and to start to make changes right away. And these are just 4 ideas to reduce your cost. You could say, well, we've already optimized the specification. Well, there's always another step that you can take. That was a lesson from the 97 financial crisis in Asia. We went through all of these kind of steps before the crisis really started to have an effect. And as they say, the strong get stronger. So the more you do, the faster you move, it puts you in a better position. So this is a message of this talk, actually. You can't do everything at once. I think it's difficult to do everything at once, but if you can develop your vision for how you can compete in a VUCA world and start to build a multi-year roadmap. So, a year one isn't starting today. What are the things I'm going to do? What are the new technologies I'm going to experiment with? And put that into practice and really make it visible in your business so that people understand the steps that you are taking to enable their success in the future, and hold them accountable for delivering those things. Then I think you've put yourself in a great place. And you have to start now. No time like today to start, right? And so you have to stick with it. In 6 months' time, when you start some of these things, then the interest has waned a bit. Your leadership really needs to push these forward. So that's all I'd like to say. We're an engineering consultancy. We help our customers build and shape their supply chains and deal with some of these issues and bring new technologies into play. So thank you very much.